This RealAg Radio podcast is brought to you by Focus Herbicide from FMC. When tank mixed with glyphosate, Focus Herbicide provides a complete solution. Burn off and extended control on key grassy and broadleaf weeds like wild oats, bromes, and kochia in lentils, wheat, and more. See your local retailer today.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Monday edition of the show. Thanks so much for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. Also a big shout out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast, whether you're in Canada, the U.S., or beyond. It's great to have you here. Okay, Agronomic Monday today, so we're going to cover all things agronomics. We got a great lineup of agronomic guests. Of course, Peter W.P. Johnson will be here. He's fresh off his trip to Idaho last week for the wheat meeting. Get his perspectives and what he heard from the audience there. We're also going to hear today from Dr. Meagan Vankosky. We're going to talk about the upcoming Season 5 of the Pest and Predators podcast. One, I cannot believe 5 years has passed. And two, I guess I'm really looking forward to hearing about some of the topics that we're going to uncover and discuss in this year's season. The Pest and Predator podcast is funded by WGRF, and it's working with field heroes. You get a chance to talk to entomologists across Canada, and it is really, really a special treat. This is I've hosted all the episodes, and it has been a lot of fun. I've learned a lot. There's a lot happening inside that canopy, everybody. It is not as simple as sometimes we make it out to be. So we'll hear from Dr. Vankosky today on the show. We'll also be joined today by Jeremy Boychyn. He is with Alberta Grains, and he's going to be with us here today on the program to talk about, I think we're going to mainly cover about seed treatment today and some of the whys and what nots and all that kind of stuff. So looking forward to chatting with Jeremy. And then we'll also have time today for the top ag news stories of the day. If you have any feedback on today's show, well, there's numerous ways you can get a hold of me. You can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Of course, we're across all the different social media platforms. Or you can call the RealAg feedback line. That number is 855-776-6147. We got a new poll up at RealAgriculture.com because, you know, we're drifting very, very close here to springtime. And I've been talking to audiences in different speeches across Canada, and it's interesting to hear what people have to say about trying to find people to work on the farm. In some cases, there's a real feeling of desperation out there. In other cases, you know, like I was at the Alberta Sugar Beet Grower meeting last week, had a great time with that audience, and I didn't get the real sense that people are having a hard time finding people to work on the farm. In that situation. But not everyone is like that. So we wanted to ask you in this week's poll, if you're hiring this year, how short are you on workers? So your options are, we need to nearly double or more our workforce. Help. Option 2, we are pretty well set up. We don't need any more, or maybe 10% short-staffed. 3 is we're focused on adding automation, efficiency, and not more people. 4, we need about 40 to 50% more people power. And finally, we're short about 15 to 40% of our workforce. So those are the options. And people started to vote because it got posted here this morning. And I'm not going to share the results with you yet. I don't want to spoil it for you. I know which way I voted or how I would vote if I could or if I chose to. And if you've been listening to this show on a regular basis, you would know what I'm talking about because I've ranted about this a little bit. So go to RealAgriculture.com and scroll down, and you'll see it on the homepage there, and you can vote in our poll, and we'll discuss some of the results later on in the week. Okay, let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to bring him in, Peter W.P. Johnson, fresh off his trip to Idaho, find out what he found out. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
FP Genetics relentlessly brings innovative new seed genetics to Canadian farms, ensuring growers, breeders, and farmers are supported and viable. Being a valued partner on your farm for decades, you can expect the continuous pursuit of the best genetics. Visit fpgenetics.ca to discover FP's strong portfolio of wheat, durum, barley, oats, peas, and rye, or contact your local FP seed dealer or territory manager to discuss your certified seed strategy specific to your region.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is your one-stop shop for everything a canola grower needs. Check out our free video series on YouTube for all the latest in canola agronomy, research, marketing, and more. Don't have time to watch? Download the podcast version of the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com or anywhere you download your podcasts. Stay on top of all things canola with the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Co-op AgZone Field is a digital agronomy tool designed to help optimize your operation. Through integrated layers of satellite imagery, soil maps, yield data, and more, Co-op Grow Team members use AgZone Field to provide organized, timely, in-season data, allowing you to make informed management decisions quickly and effectively. Trust your Co-op Grow Team to support your operation with AgZone Field. Contact your local co-op today.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Agronomic Monday. Excite your crops with inputs from Excite Bio. Access nitrogen and phosphorus with Excite Bio's lineup of inoculants and ag biologicals. Since 2010, they've been helping farmers harness the power of the soil. Learn more at excitebio.ca. That's XITEBIO.ca. Joining me right now on this Monday is Pete Johnson. Hey, Pete, how's it going?
Going awesome, thanks, Shaun. We're back into a little touch of winter here in Ontario. There's actually a bit of snow on the ground this Monday, but they are talking about high teen temperatures, kind of getting up 16 to even as high as 19 by Wednesday. So, we're just everybody's kind of backed off. Everybody was in a big rush last week because it was so warm, and then got cold over the weekend, a little bit of snow already. It's early yet. And I bet you by Wednesday, we'll be just, come on, boys, we gotta go.
Well, hey, the end of last week, you were on the speaking circuit, as we talked about last week. You were down in Idaho Falls, Idaho, of course. And, hey, what'd you learn from the farmers there?
Man, that was an absolutely awesome session, Shaun. The Idaho Wheat Commission, the direct seed meeting is where I was at. And there was a chap there, Justin Luton, out of Colorado. And he's quite a big farmer there. And they had him up to talk about stripper headers, right? So, combining wheat. And he's trying to figure out how to combine many different crops with stripper headers. But he's been running stripper headers for 23 years. In fact, he said he'd only ever run a draper head for 40 acres. So that's how invested his farm is in stripper headers. And his presentation was just awesome. I think he only used about 8 PowerPoint slides. He talked for over an hour, and it was just a discussion with the audience. And even after, there were people up there trying to pick his brain for how to make this work. And it's astounding. He has one thing about a stripper header is that virtually all the shelling happens at the head. And so it's so different than what we would use with a draper. For example, he talked about the mog, right? Going into the combine with a draper head where you have all that straw to kind of cushion the blow. And so you would think that if all I put is the grain into the combine, well, it'll last forever. Actually, your combine wears out faster with the stripper head because it doesn't have that mog of straw to kind of cushion and actually lubricate almost the whole process. It's just that grain going in there, and it's a bit harder to thresh because sometimes the chaff is still attached, and just a whole bunch of things like that. But at the end of the day, from an economic standpoint, in the dry climate of the U.S. Midwest, of Western Canada, I just don't understand why stripper headers are not the mainstay of production, because his data was clear. A 10 bushel yield increase where he used stripper headers and left the stubble standing versus where they clipped the stubble short. And that was 2 years after the fact. He was still seeing the impact. And it's 100% a moisture thing. He showed that clearly. It's just on super dry springs, his neighbors are seeding into dust, and it was almost too wet where he had high yield wheat right beside it because the stubble was holding so much moisture and he trapped more snow and he wasn't getting the evaporation. And he got great stands where his neighbors had to wait for the rains to happen, and the yield difference was just quite incredible.
Okay, so you're excited. He's obviously committed. The data sounds like it's in favor of using the stripper header. Why aren't more people using them? What's the barrier?
So, Shaun, I really think the barrier is just knowledge. Plus, the one thing about a stripper header, and I did not realize this, I've never run one. Someday, Justin said, come on down, we'll let you run one. It's all, I think I'd love to. Maybe you could pay for that for me, Shaun. That would be really good. It would be like professional development for real agriculture. Anyway, it's all good. So, but he said that the trick is that because it all happens at the head, that you really have to understand that. And when you first get in, if you've never run one, you can have massive header loss. He has his header loss and his entire loss through the whole combine process down to 0.2 of a bushel per acre. But he says when you're running the stripper, because everything's happening at the head, that you will see kernels once in a while spewing out in front of the header, and people just look at that and that's loss, and we're not taking that loss, even though you get more loss when the mog goes through the combine. It's so hard to get all of that grain out of that mass of straw that you're feeding through the combine. He said that most of the time he's at 0.2 of a bushel per acre. People talk about lodged grain. He talked about going in to grain that was totally lodged from wheat stem softfly, just flat on the ground. And because of the vacuum that these stripper headers create, he was actually able to suck that up off the ground. He harvested at least 95% of the grain. And when he was done, the stubble was standing taller than it was before he harvested it. And then it also was able to trap more snow and keep that process going. So I think there's this mindset around stripper headers that people don't want to change, and they're not comfortable with what they see. But if Justin is right, boy, once you get onto it, she's a sweet system. And if there's 10 bushels more there next year, well, so you lose 0.2 of a bushel to gain 10. I'm pretty cool with that, man.
Very cool. Well, you know what? Hey, the audience can give us their feedback too, for or against. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Pete, I also wanted to talk to you. Now, there was a bit of a back and forth. I'm not going to say controversy, but just kind of a back and forth between some farmers in Ontario over the weekend about corn planting populations. And my understanding was that we're trying to push the populations higher for a number of reasons, but some of the farmers were arguing for lower ones. So what's your opinion on optimal planting populations for corn?
So if you look at the data, Shaun, and it was a great discussion on Twitter, and it just those Twitter discussions, when you can get them going where it's just good back and forth discussion and people are throwing ideas in and suggestions. I love those. And this was a great one. But if you look at the research data, and Bob Nielsen has done that, he's retired now, of course, but he did that through Indiana, Purdue University in Indiana. And he's looked at it over time. And one of the reasons that we get higher corn yields today than we did 30 or 40 years ago is because we're planting higher populations. And so we're going to continue to plant higher populations. That's Bob's general analysis, because as we push the envelope, we simply need more plants there to generate that amount of biomass and have roots in the soil to pull out the nutrients. And in this discussion, it's kind of interesting because they talked about 10 bushels per 1,000 seeds. And that would suggest that, every plant has to produce a certain number of seeds, and it's all good. But the data really is clear that, and corn is different, by the way, than wheat and soybeans. And you and I have had this discussion a few weeks back, or maybe might even be 3 months ago. But we know, and Dave Hooker presented this data really well, with soybeans, low yield areas need more seed because the plants simply don't get big enough. We don't get enough nodes per acre, and those low yield areas need more seed. Similarly with wheat, most of the time, low yield areas, more seed. Corn's the exact opposite. And I think part of that is because with wheat, I'm seeding, 1.5 million seeds per acre. With soybeans, I'm seeding 150,000 seeds per acre. With corn, I'm seeding 30,000 or 35,000 seeds per acre. And in high yield environments, you simply need more plants in order to achieve that higher yield. The corn cob at 25,000 plants per acre in a 280 bushel yield environment, the cob simply can't flex enough. And most of our hybrids we've bred so that they don't tend to throw double cobs or triple cobs. And we want them to put all the good into one cob. And yeah, sometimes we see double cobs. Most of the time, that's not a good thing. In Zambia, where they only get 10,000 plants per acre, they've actually bred plants that will throw double cobs on a regular basis because they know their population is so low. But here in North America, you want high yields, you really do have to be at the upper end of that population. And I mean, all the seed corn company data is quite clear that you need those higher populations in higher yield environments, and you need lower populations in lower yield environments. So if you're farming a droughty sand on the knolls and you're going into a beautiful clay loam in the hollows that's got, much higher yield potential, you better be able to use variable rate seeding. So you're putting 24,000 on the sand knolls, just as an example, and 34 or 36,000 in those clay hollows. That's the way to maximize your economics and your final yield.
Interesting. Yeah. And so review again, if I was going to go to say like that lower amount, what would be the situation where I would do like say 30,000?
So if you have lower yield potential, you're limited by water, and hybrids are different as well, Shaun. So you really got to be careful with that. And the corn companies, the corn seed companies have done an awesome job of identifying varieties that respond better to high populations and those that don't respond as well. So look at that data from your seed supplier and say, okay, this one doesn't respond as well to high populations. So, maybe we do pull it back to 30 or 32, or I'm in a field that I only have 200 bushel yield potential. It's not a grand field. So then we probably pull that yield or that seeding rate back to match the yield potential of that field.
Good stuff. Hey, really quickly here, nitrogen on the wheat crop in Ontario, when?
So that's been a great discussion, and we released a little video on Thursday about that. And, we're ahead of normal. It's an El Nino year. We have no ice cover on the lakes at all. The second warmest February, driest February in at least 40 years, something like that. And so the wheat has broken dormancy in early March in much of Ontario, and it normally doesn't break dormancy till late March. So we're maybe 2 weeks ahead of normal, and that rethinks your nitrogen strategy. But be careful, any early nitrogen, highly susceptible to loss by denitrification. So if you decide to change, put a little bit on early, which I think is a cool thought process, then you force yourself into being split nitrogen application, no doubt about that.
Good stuff. Hey, Pete, whoa. Before I let you go, what are you doing this week?
Oh, so this week, man, I got a couple of meetings, one on Tuesday, one on Thursday, the Word on Wednesday. But what's really keeping me busy this week, Shaun, is the play. We opened Friday. It's Miss Super Test, the Bob Hayward story. And so we are hard into last-minute rehearsals. Every night this week, Peter will be at the theater trying to fine-tune his role as Jim Thompson, in the Bob Hayward story.
Good stuff. Okay, well, have yourself a great week, Pete. Have yourself a great week, Pete. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, you as well, Shaun. Thanks so much. Talk to you soon.
Too many W's. Invita bridges the nitrogen gap all season long, enabling your corn crop to fix the nitrogen it needs from the atmosphere when and where it needs it most. Let Invita set your crop up for success by requesting it from your local retailer. We'll be right back on Real Ag Radio. We're going to hear about pests and predators right after this.
I'm Lindsay Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomist, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomist with me, Lindsay Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
Through a growing storm of kochia, cleavers, chickweed, and more, there's a clear path. Introducing Oxbow, a versatile cereal broadleaf herbicide that gets the job done. Powered by Duplisan technology, Oxbow is your workhorse on resistant kochia and other tough weeds. With flexibility in timing, rates, and recropping options, your path is clear. Find your way on the path of least resistance at newfarm.ca/Oxbow.
Peter Johnson at Wheat Pete, RealAgriculture.com, and what an opportunity! Oh my gosh! You think you can't grow better wheat? You are absolutely wrong. We're going to show you how to strive for those record wheat yields that they get in the UK and in New Zealand. You can grow 150 bushel wheat. I'll show you how.
Catch Wheat Pete's Word every Wednesday on RealAgriculture.com or download the podcast on iTunes or Spotify. And welcome back to Real Ag Radio. We're now going to discuss, it's hard to believe, Season 5 of the Pest and Predator podcast. It has been a ton of fun being the host of this podcast, talking to entomologists from across the country and really learning about a whole bunch of different pests and things in the canopy, and also learning a lot about beneficials, those workers, they're working for you for free. So we're covering a lot of ground with Pest and Predator podcast. Joining us right now to talk about Season 5 is Dr. Meagan Vankosky. She is with AFC in Saskatoon. Dr. Vankosky, how are you doing?
I'm well, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing great. Good. Okay, so what can listeners expect here in Season 5?
Well, a whole bunch of different topics are going to be discussed by entomologists from across Canada, like you said. Myself, and a couple colleagues, we recorded a podcast about potentially invasive species to the prairies, which are something we want people to be aware of and watch out for. Dr. Maya Evenden is recording a podcast about the ecology of fear and how just the presence of an enemy, of a predator or a parasitoid, can impact a pest. It doesn't have to be a direct relationship. It can be indirect. And of course, then we have other podcasts about some specific pests and their interactions with their predators, parasitoids.
I've talked about frequently how much I've enjoyed doing this series, and I have learned so much. Talk to us about the why. Why is this podcast series, Pests and Predators, why is it so important?
Well, we think it's really important because the work that beneficial insects do for us, in terms of pest management and agriculture, can often be overlooked. And so this podcast has really been meant to help raise awareness of the important species, the spiders, the parasitoids, the pollinators, the predators, all of those different groups that are providing farmers with work that they might not know about. It helps to raise awareness in terms of insecticide applications. When is the best time to help protect those beneficial insects, but also have the best impact on the predator populations? There's just so much complexity in the insect world that people don't necessarily know about. And so we're hoping that these podcasts can help to bring awareness to some of those interactions. Insects are so cool, so we'd love to talk about them as well.
Yeah, let's talk about the funding. Who's making this all possible from a financial perspective?
It's all possible thanks to WGRF. Back in 2017 or 2018, we were sitting around the table at a Prairie Pest Monitoring Network meeting, and this whole Field Heroes idea was kind of born out of those discussions. And WGRF has been our partner the whole way in helping to promote this work and to provide that funding for predators and for the podcast, but also for Field Heroes.
Yeah, great stuff. Big thanks to WGRF for funding this important project. And now, as you mentioned, we've been recording some of the episodes. We're getting them ready. When are they going to air?
So the podcast series for 2024 is due to start airing later this month, actually. March 18th, I believe, is the first episode, and then they'll be bi-weekly after that until the end of May.
Great stuff. I've learned so much, Dr. Vankosky, about what is happening in the canopy. A lot of times we think about some of these things, but when we really have dived into with experts like yourself, there is a whole ecosystem inside of there that is just so fascinating. I can see why people like yourself got into entomology in the first place.
Great. Yeah, no, I think what you're saying goes back really well to some of the very first Field Heroes materials, which were those check the net infographics, where not everything that is in a field is bad. There's so many good things in our fields, and so, like you say, there's so much going on in the canopy. It's all related. It's all very cool.
Awesome stuff. Well, I'm looking forward to season 5. That is Dr. Meagan Vankosky. She is an entomologist with AFC in Saskatoon. Dr. Vankosky, thanks so much for joining us here today on RealAg Radio.
Thank you.
We'll be right back on RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM, right after this.
Does your N stabilizer contain an active ingredient load high enough to be agronomically effective? If not, it could be costing you time and money. If you're putting down a nitrogen stabilizer, put your trust in Koch Agronomic Services. Solutions like Super U, Tribune, and Anvil. Each delivers high active ingredient concentrations that low-rate products just can't match. Compare how imitator products stack up to agronomically effective solutions at defendyourn.ca.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by BASF and Syngenta Canada.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Agronomic Monday. Vaderstad is partnering with Canadian farmers for outstanding emergence. Their line of tillage, seeding, and planting equipment offers solutions for all soil types, field conditions, and tillage practices, helping you to maximize yield. To learn more and find your local dealer, visit vaderstad.com. Let's bring in our next guest. It's great to have him back. It's Jeremy Boychyn of Alberta Grains. Hey, Jeremy, how's it going?
It's going great, Shaun. The weather is warming up, and it's making me excited for spring.
Yes. After we could use more snow. I watched what Saskatchewan got last week and was a little bit envious, man.
Yeah, we had an okay amount. I think the last week snowfall we had, it was maybe 6 to 8 inches where I was. Obviously, that'll change, but I'm watching this melt and thinking about, okay, well, last time we got this snow and it melted, and then we went into a deep freeze, right? We went to minus 40 for, what was that, a week? And that ground just froze solid with that moisture in there, which is great. But now the snow that we got after that, you can just see it's not sinking in because the ground is frozen solid still. So we're getting a bit of runoff. But, you're right. We're going to need some of that moist spring snow and rain to really help with germination across the province, across Western Canada. It's really going to be what's going to help us push forward. But more than that, we're going to need some good rainfall to recharge those soils that are low on moisture. But as we warm up, I'm starting to think, okay, are we going to be heading towards ultra early seeding and seeding season? I listened to Wheat Pete on Monday not too long ago, and he was talking about producers in Western Canada hitting ground, and I'm thinking, are we getting there? It's supposed to be 10 degrees this coming weekend, so are we heading down this direction? I think it's something that, if you haven't tried, it's something to think about, getting your wheat in early. Brian Barris has done this research across Western Canada, looking at the potential benefits of seeding early, and that is looking at seeding when soil temperatures are 2 to 4 degrees Celsius. And that's where he saw the greatest yield benefit above seeding at even 10 degrees Celsius. So huge benefit, but, seeding at high seeding rates, 400 seeds per meter squared, and when you look at the research, that ends up being about 240 plants per meter squared, so about 24 plants per foot squared. So really seeing a high target and managing some of that emergence a little bit. And you think, okay, why is there a big benefit out of this? Like, why are we seeing yield increases out of this early seeding? And if you dig into the numbers a little bit, it's actually pretty interesting, because the seeding date, they had 4 seeding dates ranging from 0 degrees up to 10 degrees. And it didn't really impact emergence that much. They were still landed in about the same percent or same plants per square foot. But what they did see was an increase in number of heads per square foot at early seeding date. And this ties back to, and I know Pete talks about the yield enhancement network all the time, and number of heads per square foot. And what they saw was a 3 heads per square foot increase at the earliest seeding date. And you're like, that doesn't sound like very much. But if you increase that over an acre, that's 130,000 heads additionally per acre, adding to what ends up being about 5.5 bushels increase above the later seeding date. So really driving that increase.
Other agronomic considerations, if we are going to do this ultra early seeding, what are some of the things we need to think about agronomically?
Yeah, so this is important. I mentioned high seeding rate, and that's going to help make sure there's good competition within those seeds, making sure you're getting the best plants emerging. But also, there is that abiotic stress early in the season. You're dealing with cold, wet conditions, and it's straining on that seed and on that emerging plant. So having that dual seed treatment, which has been proven to help mitigate abiotic stress. So this isn't disease stress, this isn't insect stress, this is environmental stress. Cold conditions, wet conditions, just additional stress on that plant. So it'll help with that. But this is interesting, because it ties into this conversation that we've been hearing lately that, seed treatments really help with early seeding. We're helping with that early stress, which it does, but then it almost seems like there's a contrast of, okay, well, are seed treatments really helping that much with the later seeding? It's really meant for early seeding. And I want to squash that right now, because if you look at some of the research that kind of tracks what the impact of some of these pathogenic fungi have on germinating seeds and seedlings, it is at the ideal germination temperature. So, above 15 degrees to 25 degrees Celsius, where we're seeing a lot of infection from this pathogenic fungi. So that's where those seed treatments are really going to be helpful to mitigate some of those impacts. Yes, you're getting quicker emergence, so it's more likely going to grow past and not actually die have seedling death because of these pathogenic fungi, but you'll still get infection. And then when we see the potential risk there is, okay, well, we have a plant that's grown through infection, but the roots have been infected by this pathogenic fungi. So then when we see stress later in the season, whether it be drought or heat stress, there's just more pressure on that root system to sustain grain filling and maximizing that yield potential. So I want to kind of push back on this idea that early seeding needs a seed treatment more than later seeding. You're really competing with two different pressures there, where early seeding is really that abiotic stress and actually some of the storage molds that as that seed is sitting in the soil, those storage molds, so the aspergillus and the penicillium will actually colonize on that seed and can reduce germination, where later seeding, it's more that pathogenic fungi that's going to infect the plant, potentially cause reduction in germination, but then potentially impact the ability to maximize yield and grain fill late in the season if there is that extra stress on the root system. So there's benefits on both sides there, Shaun.
Yeah, and another disease that creates a lot of problems for us is Fusarium head blight, and that kind of ties into this seed treatment discussion as well.
Yeah, so, over this winter, multiple times I've been hearing we're seeing increases in Fusarium head blight in Alberta. And I know it's been well established in Manitoba and Ontario, and it's certainly well established in Saskatchewan, but there's still parts of Alberta where it's not that well established. And producers need to be on the watch out for this, because if they're in areas where pressure is starting to grow, and you can look at the risk maps that have been developed by the Alberta seed processors. They've done a lot of work tracking the amount of infected seeds, so take a peek at that. You really want to protect yourself, because if you haven't been downgraded for FG at the elevator, if your neighbors haven't been downgraded, you really want to avoid bringing in seed or utilizing seed that's been infected with Fusarium graminearum, because that's how you're introducing it to your field. And if you think about it, if you have 1% infection in a seed lot, that is 12,000 plants per acre that potentially are going to be infected with Fusarium, and then leave residue on the field that's going to allow for spores to develop for future infection to occur on the heads. So you really want to be protective of seed lots coming in, and make sure that if you haven't had downgrading on your farm, you're really avoiding anything that has infection in it. And if it has low-level infection, make sure you're utilizing a seed treatment to mitigate the impacts and potentially mitigate the addition of inoculum into your field. If you have established Fusarium in your field, if you've been downgraded before, really you're using that seed treatment to reduce the amount of seedling death that occurs from Fusarium infection. And it's not really protecting, it isn't protecting actually at all the potential infection of heads later in the season. It really is just reducing the amount of seedling death that occurs because of that seed infection. We prevent or mitigate or reduce the amount of head infection by those good management practices, right? We're selecting the right variety. We're doing good seeding rates. We're scouting. We're using fungicides. We're watching the risk maps, and we're managing our seed. Those are the things that are going to help reduce the infection levels if you already have establishment. So just those two different tactics, depending on where you're sitting at with infection on your farm and in your region, and protecting yourself from having a big spore load in your field if you haven't seen that previous infection before.
Yeah, being preventative, right? That's
Exactly,
a big part of it here. Now, do you have some on-farm trial results for enhanced efficiency fertilizers? Do you, or is this a new project that you're working on this year?
Yeah, Shaun. So we've been, as Alberta Grains, we've been running on-farm trials now for about 4 years. This is where we work with producers. We're testing management practices on the farm to get an idea of, okay, what is the actual impact of this on farm? What do the logistics look like? What are the economics? Because there's new questions coming up all the time. And one thing that we tested last year was actually the use of enhanced efficiency fertilizers. There's been a huge amount of discussion about what are the actual impacts. Are we seeing the yield benefit out of these? We know through research that they do reduce the amount of emissions that we see. So what's the impact on farms? So we implemented 4 trials last year across Alberta, ranging from Barron's, Alberta, all the way up to kind of the Edmonton area. So we had 4 different locations. 4 different products, actually. We use Super U, Nitrane, ESN, and Neon Air. The only product, well, ESN is a little bit different in that it's an actual coating that reduces the amount of loss that happens, or the speed at which nitrogen is being lost to the environment and hopefully being taken up to the plant. And then the Nitrane is the only one that just has a volatilization coverage. The other 3 would have volatilization and leaching coverage. So we use this at different ratios for the 4 different trials, different ratios as in, we did treatments with 100% urea, and then others as a 50-50. So 50% enhanced efficiency fertilizer and 50% urea, making up the entire amount of nitrogen required. And what we saw last year is that there was actually no yield difference at any of these trial locations across Alberta, which is interesting because if you look at Brian Barris's recent research, in the dark brown soil zone, he did see a yield bump with the use of Super U. So it could be that, this past year we did have a very dry spring, so not a lot of leaching occurring, probably not a lot of volatilization occurring also because we banded these relatively deep. So just not seeing a lot of loss because of the environmental conditions. So, it's interesting seeing these trials, and I highly encourage producers who are looking at, these new tools, new practices, even stuff as simple as, okay, how do actual seeding rates impact me on my farm? What about PGRs if I'm trying to mitigate lodging? What are the impacts there? These replicated randomized trials provide a huge benefit. One of the most exciting ones I get to see is when a producer does a variety comparison. We've done a few of those over the past few years, and I love seeing those results because sometimes they're way more surprising than you think. We take inferences from our seed guides and then see how they respond in the field. And, based on management practices, it's not always what you expect. So it's exciting to see. And if anyone's interested in being a part of this with Alberta Grains, and I'll say, Sask Wheat, Sask Barley, Manitoba Crop Alliance, they're all running somewhat similar programs. So if this sounds interesting to you, I'd say, reach out to the commissions, and they can help be a part of kind of testing these products with you and seeing what kind of value they have for you on farm.
Hey, Jeremy, quickly on the EEFs, what are your thoughts on cutting the nitrogen rate when you do use some of these products?
Yeah, so this is, when I chat with the researchers, this is the one thing that comes back. Okay, we're not seeing a loss or a negative impact with the use of enhanced efficiency fertilizers. So the question is, can we reduce the amount of nitrogen we're putting down with the use of an enhanced efficiency fertilizer, maintain our yield, but not lose the economics, but still gain that environmental consideration of mitigating loss to the environment. So this is a trial I'm trying to get in place this year at a few different locations. So if you're in Alberta or a producer in Alberta and would like to ask this question, reach out to me and we can get this in place.
Great stuff. Hey, Jeremy, thanks so much for joining us here today.
Thanks for having me, Shaun.
That is Jeremy Boychyn of Alberta Grains. And Alberta Grains, one of the sponsors of our Wheat School, which you can find at wheatschool.com. And Jeremy is a rather frequent staple as an expert on the Wheat School. It's also brought to you by Syngenta Canada and C&M Seeds, along with Alberta Grains. Like I said, that is at wheatschool.com. We'll be right back here on RealAg Radio. We've got the top ag news stories of the day coming up. Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops. It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcast. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School, brought to you by BSF Canada.
What's next for your fields? At Pioneer, delivering industry-leading genetics drives everything we do. From the scientists in the lab to our local teams with boots on the ground, we are determined to get there first. Developing top-performing products, proven in more growing conditions than ever before. Pioneer. What's next happens here. Visit pioneer.com/Canada to learn more.
Next thing you know the next thing. Next is a short podcast discussing agriculture's emerging next generation tech and trends as they're happening in our industry. Next is Now, presented by GFL Ag. Listen where you get your podcasts. Okay, let's get to the top ag news stories of the day today on RealAg Radio. And for a Monday, there's quite a bit. A very, very concerning story in Bloomberg. Pay attention. There's too much wine out in the market. How is that possible? There's too much wine. Bloomberg says it's a problem that's playing out all over the world. Through global production, which hit a 60-year low in 2023, a wine glut is persisting, signifying that demand is falling even faster. And while data from the International Organization of Vine and Wine show that global consumption has lagged behind production of wine since at least 1995, the industry has hit an inflection point as changing drinking patterns and lackluster economic conditions looks like it's here to stay. What the heck? I know our household is doing our part. California is currently experiencing one of the worst imbalances in demand and supply we've seen in 30 years, says Stuart Spencer, Executive Director of the Lodi Wine Grape Commission in Central Valley. Meanwhile, Australia produced its smallest amount of wine in 15 years in the 22-23 season, but continues to struggle with historically high inventory levels, according to a November report by industry group Wine Australia. Boy, just think about the Okanagan Valley and some of the prices paid for some of that land and the wineries. You're like plus $150,000 per acre. Some of those significant vanity projects, like everybody wants to own a winery, right? It's wow. I didn't realize it was in such troubles. So that seems like a pretty and the story in Bloomberg shows people basically lighting their vines on fire and putting in some other crops. We look at beef and pork prices. Wholesale beef prices climbing. Wholesale beef prices firmed 43 cents for choice to 307.04 and $1.17 for select to 297.43 on Friday. That's the highest price for choice beef since late October of last year, while the select price is the highest since last June. Beef packer margins have improved amid the rising wholesale prices, but remain in the red. So packers still losing money, even though there's been an increase in some of the prices. On the hog front, cash hog index was unchanged. Pork cutout firms. The CME lean hog index is unchanged at 81.48 as of March 7th, hinting at a potential stall of the seasonal rally since the beginning of the year. April lean hog futures finished Friday at 289.5, premium to today's cash. Quote, the pork cutout value firmed 96 cents on Friday amid gains in all cuts except the loin. Average American household debt surges amid economic challenges. Household debt in the U.S. reached $17.5 trillion by the end of last year, marking a significant increase of almost $3.5 trillion since 2019, before the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. A recent report by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York revealed a resurgence in home equity lines of credit over the past 2 years, following a decade of declines. Credit card debt has surpassed $1 trillion, with credit limits rising for the 11th consecutive quarter. A lot of focus this week on what the Federal Reserve will do, but in Japan, they've avoided recession in Q4. In the fourth quarter of 2023, Japan's GDP experienced a modest growth of 0.1% quarter on quarter. This growth contrasts with the initial estimate, which suggested a 0.1% decline in the previous quarter's contraction of 0.8%. This positive growth helped the Japanese economy narrowly avoid a recession as the market expectations were for a 0.3% increase. Well, if there was a commodity that maybe you should have been invested in, we shouldn't even call it a commodity, but an investment opportunity, and I know I missed the boat on this one, Bitcoin, boom to the upside. The price of Bitcoin has reached a record high, surpassing $71,000. The surge comes after 5 consecutive days of rallying, with Bitcoin gaining over 60% since the beginning of the year. It is up 60% since January 1st. The increase in price can be attributed to a significant influx of capital into recently approved Bitcoin exchange-traded funds. Additionally, British regulators announced on Monday their approval for the creation of a similar cryptocurrency-related securities, which has likely contributed to the ongoing surge in Bitcoin's value. I heard on Bloomberg Radio early this morning. Dennis Gartman, he was famous commodity trader and investor. He talked about how, he admitted that he was wrong on Bitcoin, still wouldn't invest in it though. He said if you're looking for that kind of a trade, he still thinks gold would be the better place to be putting your money than Bitcoin. But he said, congratulations on those of you that stuck it through, because those returns have been big. That's 60% year to date. Financial Times takes an in-depth look at the biggest growth sector in Brazil, and it's agriculture. The article explores the rapid transformation and economic boom experienced by Brazil's central west region, particularly in towns like Boa Esperança do Norte. Fueled by the agribusiness sector, this boom is characterized by significant growth in agriculture, with soybean production being a major driver, buoyed by global demand, especially from China. The region's economy has witnessed remarkable expansion, leading to newfound wealth, prosperity, evident in rising GDP and conspicuous consumption. However, the article also highlights the looming threat posed by climate change, as evidenced by extreme weather events impacting agricultural productivity. Ukrainian grain exports so far in March reached 1.54 million metric tons, according to the Agriculture Ministry data, down from 1.93 million metric tons during the same period in 2023. The shipments bring 23-24 Ukrainian grain exports to 31.2 million metric tons, which includes 16.7 million metric tons of corn, 12.5 of wheat, 1.76 of barley. The total compares with 34.2 million metric tons exported at this point during the 22-23 marketing year. Former President Trump defended his plan to increase tariffs on Chinese imports if reelected. In an interview with CNBC Squawk Box on Monday, Trump said he was not concerned that potential retaliatory action from China would harm U.S. growth. That's okay, he said. They might do that, but they didn't do that with me. Even if they do, let American companies come back to America, where he was trying to emphasize the importance of bringing American companies back to the U.S., even if tariffs are imposed. He's also suggesting imposing tariffs as high as 60% on Chinese imports and targeting Chinese manufacturers operating in Mexico. That's called nearshoring. He criticized Chinese companies for relocating to Mexico to sell goods to the U.S. market because of, obviously, proximity, geographically speaking. You might be tempted to enlist artificial intelligence for help with designing an exercise regime, but tools like ChatGPT might lead you astray, according to recent analysis. Well, we're not going to talk about exercise, but this made me think of using things like ChatGPT or other AI tools when it comes to something like agronomic decisions or livestock management. People taking some of the output as kind of the gospel, so to speak. So the article talks about how when researchers examined ChatGPT's workout recommendations, they found that the tool didn't reflect the guidelines considered standard among medical professionals, according to an analysis published in the journal JMIR Medical Education. The researchers used AI to generate personalized exercise recommendations and evaluated the recommended regimes for comprehension, accuracy, and readability. Most of the ChatGPT recommendations were factually correct, with 90.7% accuracy rate when compared with a gold standard reference score, but the researchers write that the recommendations weren't comprehensive enough, covering only 41.2% of the guidelines. Be interesting if we did this with agronomic. But Pete and I should try this. We should do we'll put a bunch of agronomic recommendations or questions in and see how close the accuracy is. That'd be fun. It'd be a good little experiment, sort of a parallel one to what we're hearing about exercise. If you have any feedback on today's show, we'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can, of course, also call that RealAg feedback line. The number there is 855-776-6147. I want to thank everybody for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio, and we will chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.
Thanks for downloading this RealAg Radio podcast, brought to you by Focus Herbicide from FMC. Lentil and wheat growers get a clean start this spring with Focus Herbicide. Along with early burn-off and extended weed control, Focus Herbicide provides excellent resistance management. See your local retailer today.